everyone. So in honor of Earth Day, we have probably the dietitian's dietitian, one of the best well, if not most well-known dietitian in the plant-based world, multiple author of multiple books, which we're going to talk about several of them today. A dear friend. She's a fabulous chef. She's a grandmother. She's an athlete, and she's amazing. And you get to ask her questions. Aren't you lucky? This is Brenda Davis. Hey, Brenda, how you doing?
Hey, AJ, thanks so much for having me. It's really nice
Are
to
you
be
kidding?
with you.
I always say you're like a triple threat. You're really smart, you're really pretty, and you can cook, and you're very athletic. So you're actually a quadruple threat. And I'll never forget when you did your age in push-ups. I cannot do one push-up, and Brenda's just a tiny bit older than me, and she can do as many push-ups as she is old. And she's the author of many books. One of them we're going to talk about today is one of her more recent book. It's called Kick Diabetes Essential. Let me just tell you, on the front, Dr. Michael Greger writes, Kick Diabetes Essentials is a goldmine for people with diabetes. It's packed with solid scientific evidence, practical guidelines, and carefully constructed recipes. Brenda Davis is my favorite go-to dietitian. You can rest assured that you're in very capable hands. And she also co-authored a book with the co-author Visanto Molina, who we talked about last week, who's absolutely adorable too. And a lot of people said you guys sound alike, which you do. But I'm wondering
from Canada.
Exactly. And you also had another wonderful book a few years ago, Defeating Diabetes. Why are you so interested in diabetes?
Well, I'm interested in diabetes because it affects so many lives. It's unbelievable. If you look at the graphs of the rise in diabetes, it basically mirrors the rise in overweight and obesity. And we actually see diabetes, even type 2 diabetes in children. That never happened a few decades ago. And my father died of diabetes. All of his entire family, all his siblings have diabetes. I worked in the Marshall Islands, where they actually have the highest rates of diabetes on the planet. And I just absolutely love the people there, and to see what diabetes is doing to that population is just gut-wrenching. And so I have a huge interest in diabetes for all of those reasons.
How did you get involved with that? Sounds like such an interesting project. How did you get involved with the Marshall Islands? Because up until you got involved with it, I'll be honest, I've never heard of the Marshall Islands.
Well, not very many people have. In fact, the Marshall Islands were they're so remote, they're tiny. There's only about 60,000 people there, and they're kind of halfway between Hawaii and Australia. And so they're in quite a strategic location between Asia and the United States, or North America. And so they're even after the Second World War, they were actually used as atomic bomb testing grounds because they're so remote. And the United States actually has quite a relationship with the Marshall Islands because of that, and has been helping to support them in various ways. And so what happened here is a group called Canvasback Missions. They have been providing medical teams to Micronesia for probably now well over 30 years. And they would bring teams of ENT docs or oncology doctors, and they would perform 70 or 80 surgeries in a week, and just help people doing these kinds of medical services that they didn't have. And they watched the diabetes epidemic unfold in that country, going from almost nothing to the highest rates in the world. And they thought, we've got to try to do something. And so Canvasback Missions is a Seventh-day Adventist mission group. So they're plant-based, and they put in a proposal for a grant from the U.S. Department of Defense, and they were awarded that grant to do research on diabetes in the Marshall Islands. And so they had to come up with a research team. And the fellow that they hired to be their medical director had just been to a CHIP summit, like the annual CHIP, the Complete Health Improvement Project annual meeting. And I was a presenter there, and I had just written the diabetes book, and he purchased it. And he said, you know what, to the folks at Canvasback, I think the lady that wrote this book should be our director of nutrition and help us do this. She could set up, you know, some sort of program. And so they called me. And of course, you know, they asked me essentially to free my schedule for 8 months, to go there, to create the program, to, you know, conduct the program, all of that. And at first I thought, well, how can I do that? I've got lectures scheduled. But my son, you know, I was talking to my husband and my son about it. He was in grade, I think 11 at the time. And he said, Mom, if you don't go, I'm going without you. And my husband said, you know, I think I could get a leave of absence from work and come and help you. And so we just decided we would go. Our daughter was already in university, and so we went, and it was just a remarkable experience. It was incredible. I mean, just to give you guys an idea, the food, the people used to live on basically the plants they could collect from the ground, and fish and whatever they could get from the sea, seaweed and fish and whatever, octopus, and that was their diet for centuries. And they went from that kind of diet to a diet that was mostly processed foods, because the island, the main island that about 30,000 are on, might sustain, I don't know, 500 to 1,000 people if they were living off the land. But there are 30,000 people there, so they can no longer be sustained just with the land. You're talking about an island that's 3.7 square miles in area, 30 miles long. It's this long, skinny strip of land, and it's just not enough to support everyone. So they have to import foods. And because there's not a lot of industry there, you know, you end up with bringing in cheap food. So ramen noodles, you know, these are these deep fried salty noodles, and sticky rice, sticky white rice, and Spam, which is you know, Spam is a highly processed meat in a can. And then the drink of choice is called luau. And luau, number one ingredient is high fructose corn syrup. And then the most popular snack, this was what shocked me the most popular snack for children is ramen noodles with Kool-Aid powder sprinkled on top. And not only that, but sometimes kids will sprinkle a little white powder on top of that called Asinomoto, which is pure MSG. And one of the things I said when I first started working there was, I honestly couldn't design a diet to induce diabetes any more efficiently than the diet this population has adopted. And I'll tell you, it's not that easy for them to change. And the reason being that there's not a lot of access to fresh produce. So when you've got an island that's 3.7 miles in area and 30,000 people, how much farmland do you think there is? There's not a lot. And so there's, you know, the odd person growing a little bit, but basically not a lot. So they have to import food. You can imagine the cost of flying in fresh produce, the cost of, you know, even boating. If you send it by boat, you're looking at it sitting on the boat for 2 weeks before it gets there. So very, very challenging situation. So we did, you know, we taught them how to sprout. We got these little bins so everybody could grow food in their yards. And we did everything we could to encourage agriculture and an increase in intake of produce, but it is really challenging.
Have you followed up with any of them since you've been there? Are you in touch with them? Did you do any documentary style filming while you were there?
Yeah, well, actually, our Canvasback did do a little bit of documentary filming. We actually published in 2019 our first paper, and we will be doing another paper with the results. So this was a paper talking about all of the, you know, the research that we actually did. We had 5 overlapping cohorts. So we had 5, a cohort is a group of people where you take the group and you divide it randomly so that you have a control group and an intervention group. And then you put the intervention group through what we did was we put the intervention groups through a lifestyle program. And the lifestyle program involved, you know, being with us for a lot of time, for 4 days a week for about a month. And so they were with us for probably, 5, 6, 7 hours a day. And then we went down to twice a week, then once a week. But it was a very, very intense lifestyle program that involved not just a plant-based, diet, but also exercise, walking after every meal, a formal exercise class, cooking classes, education programs in the evening. It was a really quite a comprehensive program. And of course, what we saw, which was really remarkable, was we saw people within a week, the pain in their legs that had been there for 20 years was gone in many of these people. Their heads were clearing. They were eating 5 grams of fiber a day. So they were going from going to the bathroom once a week to going to the bathroom twice a day, and it was actually scary for them at first because they didn't know what was going on or if it was even normal or healthy to be going to the bathroom that often. But we just saw remarkable changes, and their blood sugars dropped on average in the first 2 weeks about 75 points. And we went back. So this research actually took place quite a while ago. So it was 2006 that we first went over. But I've been going back every year or two since, and we still conduct these sort of lifestyle interventions. They're no longer research, but we still help people to try to change their lifestyle. And one of the things that I think is just most exciting to me is the stores now have little, sections with healthy foods, and the restaurants have a wellness little menus. And probably the biggest thing is when we got there, people wouldn't walk. They were embarrassed to walk because if they were seen walking, it meant they couldn't afford a taxi, which was 25 cents. And so even if they were going a block or two, they would take a taxi. And now they're just hundreds of people walking. They clear the streets in the morning to have people walking. And they've got walkathons, and they've made physical activity something that's desirable, which I think is just really wonderful.
Yeah, that must have been a career highlight for you to do a project
really
like that.
was. It was really special. I mean, it was hard when we first got there. You can't even imagine, but we had 9 men and me to do a build out. We were given the TB and leprosy clinic to use as our diabetes center. And I swear it was overrun with rats and cockroaches. And it was just, the bathrooms looked like they hadn't been cleaned in 2 years. There was no toilet seats. It was in disarray, put it that way. It was in bad shape. And we literally had to clean and build a facility. And I had a 2-burner cooktop stove to make all the food for everyone. And on top of that, I was creating the program for the participants while I was doing all of that other stuff. So I was literally working 16-hour days, 7 days a week. It was just insane. It was a very, very intense experience.
How long ago was this, and will there ever be a follow-up?
Well, we started in 2006, and we go back, like I say, every year or two. The last time I was there was 2017, and I was brought in for about a month. I brought a friend who's a speech pathologist and who is just amazing with children. And we were literally given the task of creating a nutrition education program for schools from kindergarten to grade 6. We were tasked with writing the program and teaching every teacher in the public school system how to conduct the program. So it was, again, your 14 to 16-hour days every day. And we were, just crazy busy, but it was really fun because we had, the opportunity to really connect with the teachers and the students. We did little demonstrations of how to do the nutrition education with actual children. So it was fun. It was fun.
It almost sounds like it was a reality show in some ways before reality shows were so popular.
It sure could have been, I'll tell you.
Well, especially the part about the cockroaches and the rats, I would have just gone right home. I don't know, that would have freaked me out.
Oh, I'll tell you, it was hard because every once in a while I'd open one of my beautiful drawers. We had all this new cutlery and everything, and I'd open the drawer and there'd be a rat sitting there on top of everything. So we'd have to disinfect the whole entire kitchen, and it was interesting, to say the least.
Just want to read some of the nice comments people are writing. Linda says, I love this lady. Teresa says, Brenda rocks. Jean says, love Brenda. And here's a nice comment from a fellow Canadian, from Dan, our most favorite, and he spelled it with a U, registered dietitian and fellow Canadian.
Oh, thank you, everyone.
Yeah. So there's an interesting comment from Patty. It's so difficult to convince diabetics that they can decrease their symptoms with lifestyle. Do you find that to be the case in general? And why do you think that is, when it's just been proven that it's just so reversible in so many ways?
Yeah, it's a good observation. It's an interesting observation. And I think part of it is our lifestyles are so precious to us. We like to do what we like to do. We like to eat what we like to eat. And it's so woven into our culture and our social lives, and we're defined by that. And I think in some cases, for most of us, it's almost more important to belong than it is to live. It's just, we don't want to do anything that would disassociate us from the people we care about and the lives that we live socially. And I think that's really the biggest challenge. And so one of the things that I think is really helpful is to connect with other people that are making a similar shift. And in almost every community, there are groups that support plant-based eating, and so even if someone's not terribly interested, providing them with a couple of articles, a few websites, maybe even a documentary like Eating You Alive or whatever it is that might inspire them to consider making a change. And then I find what hooks people is if we can get them to make the change for even just 3 or 4 weeks, where we say, this doesn't have to be forever, just try it. Because what happened in the Marshall Islands is people that came into the program, first of all, they didn't think diet had anything to do with their diabetes. They thought it was just, just something that was a result of the radiation fallout, or that it was just bad luck or bad genes, or what. They had no clue diet was a part of the equation at all. And so after a week or two of doing the diet, and all of a sudden their pain is disappearing and they're feeling more energetic. That's it speaks loudly. And so people are convinced by the changes in how they feel. So if someone's willing to just try it, even for a short term, often they will be hooked, and they won't want to go back to the way they felt before. And that's when they really need the support system, because it can be challenging with families and friends. So
yeah, absolutely. It's funny because people always, I've never met anybody that adopted a whole food plant-based diet that didn't feel better or relieve symptoms or even get better, but yet the recidivism often is quite high, even outside of the Marshall Islands. And I think you're right, the social pressure has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So how, I imagine, are you sheltering in place as well where you live?
Yeah, so I live in Calgary, Alberta, recently moved from Kelowna, British Columbia. And yes, like the rest of the world, I think practically at this point in time, we are pretty much in isolation. We get out every day for a little bit of bicycle riding, or when it was colder, cross-country skiing, just in a sort of more remote areas where you don't run into other people. And we do, however, see my mom, who's, she's 82 years old, and I didn't want her to have to be alone. So every night we go to my mom's house, we play a game, we, watch a show with her, whatever, just so she has some social interaction. And we also, after 2 weeks of isolation, we continue to see my daughter and her family, maybe once a week or something like that. So we order our food online and all of those things so that we're not, exposing ourselves too much.
Well, actually, playing a game sounds like fun. And I know that in general, whether it's an Iron Chef or athletics, you're very competitive. So what games are you playing with your mom? Like Scrabble?
We're playing Scrabble, and we're playing cards. She loves card games, and we all love it. It's fun. So it's just something that I don't do that often because I don't have time, but I've made time because I think it's really important.
It is so fun. Before the sheltering in place became mandatory in California, they were requesting that people over 65 shelter in place for their own safety. And because of that, I felt bad for the people that lived alone. And I started playing Scrabble and Words with Friends online with those sheltering. And now it's almost addictive. It's so fun.
It is fun.
It really is. You get this, I'm imagining you get the same television shows that we get. So I'm just, because these interviews, if people want to see your wonderful lectures, they can go onto YouTube. You've done so many,
Absolutely.
so, and, some of the guests choose to do PowerPoints, but I like to find out a little bit more about the person. So what are you and your mom watching?
Well, we are watching something called, I absolutely love this show. It's the Lost Letter Mysteries. Have you ever seen this show?
I haven't. Is it on
Oh my
Netflix?
gosh. It's just on my mom. It's on the right. She doesn't have Netflix. She just has regular TV, but she saves it so that we can skip through the commercials. And it's about letters that go to this lost letter, place with the US Postal Service, and they have to try to reconnect the people with these missing letters. And it's always a tearjerker. It's a really good show. So we watched that one. I've been watching, my husband and I sometimes watch Jane the Virgin. We've been going through that. It's just funny and it makes you laugh. And, but we have a number of shows in Canada too that we really like Heartland. And there's one that's a sort of in the early 1900s, it's called When Calls the Heart. And so they're just all touchy-feely shows that we like. And my mom doesn't like swearing, and she doesn't like, things that are violent. And so we pick shows that are feel-good shows.
That's amazing. I'm going to look up this Lost Letter Mysteries. I've never heard of it.
I love that show.
Have you heard of Schitt's Creek though? Because that is.
Oh yes, we have watched Schitt's Creek too. We have to watch the last season.
Oh my God, the last season is a tearjerker. Let me tell
Is
you.
it?
Well, because it's the last season. It's one of the best shows I've ever watched.
Really?
I just started watching. I loved Downton Abbey when it was on, and there's a new show.
Santos used to watch that. I haven't watched it yet. I think we have to watch that.
It's really good. But the guy that created it, Julian Fellows, has a new show called Belgrave, I believe it's called. So now I'm really good. So that it is kind of fun, doing things when you never got to do them before. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and the other thing, AJ, that I've really, when our gyms all shut down, that was my social life, was going to do a class at the gym most days, and yoga and step and spin and whatever. And of course, that's all gone. So I started doing, especially in the really frigid weather, we would go cross country skiing as well, but I would do one exercise program in the morning. And I have found some amazing workouts online that are completely free on YouTube, 45 minutes to an hour, super good workout. There are yoga classes, there's all kinds of things. And so it's, and you know what else I do is, if I've been working at the computer for 2 or 3 hours, I'm in the midst of book writing right now, I'll take a 10-minute break and do 10-minute ab blowout or whatever. And I just put it on YouTube, 10-minute ab class, and it just is a nice little break and gets your body moving if you're sitting at the computer for hours and hours on end. So those are fun.
That is terrific. Lavana wants to know, where do you get your groceries? Where you order your groceries?
Yeah, so we have a few places. At first, we started ordering through a place called spud.ca. And spud.ca, it's all organic food and everything. And we ordered it several times. And then somebody came on the radio and said, people who are able-bodied should not be using the delivery services that bring food to your door. Because if you use them, because they were full, it was really hard to get in. And so the people with cancer, the people with, COVID, the people with whatever, where they were, really had to stay at home for 14 days, whatever it was, they couldn't get access to those services. So we switched, and we don't use the ones that deliver to the door anymore because of that. We just use the ones where you have to drive to the store and pick it up. So we'll use, there's one that we used last week that's a fruit and vegetable market that is doing packaging the foods, which is wonderful. So we can get great organic fresh produce there. And then we use the Real Canadian Superstore, which is like a big, grocery store where you can get stuff like Greek, the Mediterranean tahini and whatever, those kinds of things, tamari or whatever, tofu and so forth.
I know we still can talk about some of your books, wonderful books that you have, but I know there's a question here from Kim, because I know that you're writing a very specific book right now with a medical doctor, because Kim says, my daughter is very influenced by her peers, that it's okay to eat the SAD diet, and says, I don't know what I'm talking about, as I'm not a nutritionist. Any ideas on how to encourage her with whole food plant-based eating?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. And I'm guessing the daughter is a teenager.
Kim, if you can respond, how old your daughter is, that would be great.
Mhm.
But
So,
even if she wasn't, kids are influenced by their peers at really all ages.
oh, it just so much so. And all I can really say is what I did with my kids.
She's 11, by the way.
Oh,
So
she's 11. Okay. Yeah. That's a really tough age, because at that age, that sort of preteen age, peer influence is just so huge, and they're trying to separate from their parents and define themselves and all of that. So it really is tough. So what I did with my kids is I explained to them why at our house we ate the way we did. So I explained to them about our concern about the environment and animals and all of those things. But I said to them, what you do when you're outside of our house is really your choice. But here are some things to watch, some things to read. So I can remember sharing a film with my son. What was it called? It was by the Tribe of Hearts. It was their first film, and it was so powerful. And what I found is when they take ownership, there's less convincing to do. And when my son especially watched these kinds of shows, the first thing he would do when he made a friend is to show them the show so that they could understand why he ate as he ate. You can't eat for anyone else. All you can do is teach. And so one of the things that I would do is involve, and I always did this with my kids, involve them in picking foods, growing foods, preparing foods. I had them very strongly engaged in the kitchen. By the time they were 8 or 9 years old, they could cook a meal, and a good meal. And so when you'd go shopping, I would say, well, what kind of fruits and what kind of vegetables do you want to try? And maybe we should, see what we could do with them. And they'd always pick things like star fruits or something that would be interesting that might impress their friends. And so they'd bring a star fruit to school and cut it, and everybody would be so amazed. And so they took ownership that way. And I think that's really helpful. One of the most important things, I think, is not to make it, there's a a kind of a division of responsibility where food is concerned. And that division of responsibility is really simple. As a parent, you are responsible for the food that your child is provided, the food that's in your house, and your child is responsible for how much food they're going to eat, and even whether they're going to eat at all. And so there's no power struggles with that. If you keep, one of the things that I found with kids is if you keep healthy foods in the house, and those are the choices that they have, that's what they end up eating. And I can remember when they would bring kids over, I would always provide either a fruit tray or a vegetable tray with a dip, and it would be gone in a matter of minutes. And you know, one of the stories I often tell, because my children were raised that way, they didn't have the option of a lot of junk food. Not that I didn't make treats and desserts, because I did, but they were healthy treats and desserts. And I can remember my daughter one time was about 9 years old, and she asked if she could have a bedtime snack. And I said, sure, you know, help yourself, see what's in the fridge. And she went in the fridge and she found a bunch of spinach. And she said, oh, we have spinach. Can I make some spinach, Mom? And I said, oh, sure. And so she, you know, she cooked it up with fresh garlic, and she's sitting at the table with her plate of spinach, and she's squeezing a fresh lemon on top. And my 6-year-old son walks up the stairs and he sees her and he says, oh, is that spinach? And she said, oh, yes, it is. And he said, well, is there any more? And she said, oh, no, sorry, I just cooked the last batch. And he burst into tears. And I thought, you know, it's what they grow up with, what you introduce them to, and how much they are involved in the food preparation. And they've both always loved fruits and vegetables because that's what they had. And it's what they shared with their friends. And so it's not that we never had, you know, popcorn or cookies, or we did, of course we did. But it was part of a healthy diet.
That's great. Does your son remember that story?
You know what? I think I've told it enough times. He probably remembers it at least that way, but he probably does. He has a really good memory.
That's terrific.
I can remember one time when he was about 2 years old, we went to our first, it was a sort of Easter potluck at the Toy Lending Library. And I thought I better make a couple of things because he might not have too much to choose from. But of course there was chips and sandwiches and all kinds of treats. And we made a great big veggie platter with dip. And he was 2 years old, he looked at all the different things. And then he took our vegetable tray and started to carry it back to our table. He thought you got to pick one. So I had to carry it back and say to him, oh no, you just get to take a few things out of it. And you get
Oh, that's adorable.
That was his favorite out of the whole thing. So it's just what they're exposed to really is important.
It's so true. It's a precious and an inspiring story, because I always think of Dr.
And
Goldhammer's
you know,
son.
the other thing, AJ, is that whenever I prepared a meal that I knew wouldn't be their favorite, let's say I was doing stew or, you know, lentils and rice or something like that, I would always include something in the meal I knew they would love. So maybe I would make a fresh loaf of bread, or I would make some, you know, vegetable that I knew was a favorite, like broccoli with, you know, cheese sauce, which is really cashew red pepper sauce. But, you know, something like that I knew they'd be excited about. So there'd be something at the meal that, you know, would be, you know, they would be happy about.
Yeah, I think about Dr. Alan Goldhammer, who told his son Gar that if you're a good boy, you get Brussels sprouts. And guess what? He's like a man now. And guess what his favorite food is? It's all how you frame it. So Janice has a question. If somebody is a type 2 diabetic, does raw food lower their blood sugar more than cooked food?
Well, I'm sorry, what was the name of the person?
Oh, Janice.
Janice. Hi, Janice. Actually, yes, and generally, and the reason is just really simple, because when you cook food, you are literally breaking down cell walls. And so, and you're increasing the sort of the surface area of the food, if you will, because it's broken down. And so it's more rapidly broken down in your system, so it's more rapidly absorbed. Now, that does not mean you shouldn't eat cooked foods, because you should have some, because there's certain foods that really need to be cooked. Large legumes like kidney beans and other large legumes need to be cooked. And I mean, you can sprout some legumes like lentils. You can sprout mung beans, and I mean, I have those on my salad every day, and they're wonderful. So the way, I'll tell you how I do things. I have a breakfast that has both cooked and sprouted grains in it. I have a lunch that's a great big giant salad, but often, like today, I had some steamed butternut squash on top, and some sprouted lentils as well. And then for dinner, our dinner is often, a cooked bowl. So it might be, black rice with steamed vegetables, some chickpeas or some sort of protein source like tofu, and then some sort of sauce on top. And then sprouts on top of that, and a few seeds perhaps. And so that's a really typical, so I'm getting a mix of raw and cooked foods. And I think I mean, you certainly could do a completely raw diet if you want to kickstart a program. And that you will see a big change in your blood sugar. And that's a very reasonable option. But over time, for balance and nutrition and your social life, it can really help to include some cooked foods as well.
That's terrific. Here's a question on gestational diabetes. And where did it go? This little feed goes very quickly. From Karen. In whole food plant-based diet during pregnancy with gestational diabetes, daughter has this and legumes give her high blood sugar. What should she eat?
Oh, that's quite interesting, because legumes have such a low glycemic index that normally they don't cause too much of a problem. So what I would do is I wouldn't necessarily eliminate legumes. Definitely she could simply, when she eats them, eat a lot of vegetables as well. And that will lower the glycemic impact of the whole meal. And so things like, vegetable soups with a few beans, the bowl, like I was talking about the bowl with, you've got a little bit of grain. You would pick a very low GI grain, like barley, for example, and then lots of steamed vegetables and a little bit of legumes on top. The other option, of course, if she's completely vegetarian, and this may horrify AJ, but she could do some veggie meats. And the veggie meats are extremely low in carbohydrates, and so they don't have a big impact on blood sugar. And yet they're a very rich source of protein. And of course, during pregnancy, protein requirements do go up substantially, about 25 extra grams of protein that you would need above and beyond the protein you already consume. So let's say you need 50 grams of protein a day, you'll need about 75. You've got a much larger blood volume, and you've got a baby growing inside you that's going to need some protein to build all the body tissues it's building. And so you definitely require more protein. And so other things that she could do that are really good sources of protein are things like hemp seeds, pumpkin seeds, particularly those two seeds are very protein-rich seeds, and they could be sprinkled on, and they will help to lower the glycemic impact of the whole meal as well.
Excellent. So Quenna says, I have been whole food plant-based since 2017, but I am unsuccessful at lowering my HbA1c. It bounces between 5.8 to 6.2, and my endocrinologist threatens to put me on metformin, but I refuse. Any ideas what I could do? Well, have I got some books for you, and I've been posting the links to them. So that's one thing I would recommend. Anything else you'd like to add to that, Brenda?
Yeah, so it's a really difficult question to answer without knowing exactly what you're eating for each meal. But let's pretend, so let's say you're eating oatmeal for breakfast. with some blueberries and some non-dairy milk, maybe some ground flaxseed on top. What I would recommend is that you go up the whole grain hierarchy. So instead of eating rolled oats, you would go up to oat groats. And oat groats has, so for example, rolled oats might have a glycemic impact or index of 55. Well, the oat groats will have a glycemic index in the 40s instead of in the 50s. And so because they take much longer for your body to break down. Again, it's this thing about the surface area of the food. It takes a long time to break down and be absorbed. So it will, cause a slower rise in your blood sugar. And so things like that. So you could look at each meal. So how do I reduce the glycemic impact? How do I add antioxidants? How do I add phytochemicals? So if your breakfast is oatmeal, blueberries, or maybe it's oatmeal, bananas, and a bit of flaxseed and some non-dairy milk, you would look at the oats get switched to oat groats. The bananas get switched to a variety of berries to increase the antioxidant potential. The flax seeds, instead of just flax seeds, you might want to switch to a seed mix where you've got some hemp, some chia, some flax, a few Brazil nuts cut in there to get the selenium in. And so your overall meal is enhanced. You might want to be adding something like a green fresh pressed juice with celery, cucumber, some fresh greens, and some lemon, some ginger, some turmeric that's right in there. I have something in the diabetes book, and I think it's in, I'm not sure if it's in I think it might actually be in the Kick Diabetes Essentials, but it's called Turmeric Tea Elixir. Yes, it is. So the Turmeric Tea Elixir right in here is, it's basically, water with an orange or some apple pieces, fresh ginger, cardamom, cinnamon, cloves, turmeric, black pepper, cayenne, and apple cider vinegar. And you start off your sort of day with something like that, where you get this huge antioxidant boost, and it, your blood sugars from your breakfast meal will help to moderate all of that. And then you go on to your lunch meal, and you say, well, what am I having for lunch every day? And I have a giant salad every day. And so you look at that salad and say, what could I add or subtract to improve or enhance the value, the antioxidant potential, the phytochemicals, all of that in this meal? And so you could add broccoli sprouts, you could add lentil sprouts, you could, there's all kinds of things that you can do to, enhance. You could say, how many colors of the rainbow are there? Do I have something purple? Do I have something orange yellow? Do I have something pink or red in the mix? And so you can just enhance the value of the meal in that way. What's my source of satiety? So you want something that's starchy, but you want something that has a low glycemic index that's starchy. So if it's a grain, it might be barley, or it might be sprouted black barley, which is something I use all the time, or because the black barley has even more phytochemicals, or the black quinoa. So you could, go that way. It might be wild rice. It could be steamed sweet potato or steamed butternut squash, which, give you that boost of carotenoids and antioxidants. And so you want to go through every single meal with a fine-tooth comb and see where you can do better, and really compare the glycemic impact of similar foods. And I think that's what we do in Kick Diabetes Essentials, is to help you walk through those kinds of fine-tuning points for your diet.
Great. Elvie has a question. Are the flavored balsamic vinegars okay for diabetics?
Yeah, so this is a question that is interesting, because a lot of people who remove oil replace it with flavored balsamic vinegars. And they are delicious, but they can be quite high in sugar. And so we just need to be aware of that. One of the things that I do, rather than simply pouring balsamic, flavored balsamic vinegar on my salad, is I make a dressing that's based on a seed. So I might use hemp seed. I might use a little bit of tahini and hemp seeds. But there's some seeds so that there's some fat in the mix, which reduces the absorption of the sugars from the balsamic vinegar and also enhances the absorption of all of those phytochemicals that are in your salad. So, just having that little bit of seed in that mix, and you don't need a lot of fat, but a little bit of fat can help slow the absorption of those sugars. So I wouldn't say that they shouldn't be part of your diet. And I'll tell you one of the reasons why. Vinegars and lemon and lime, anything acidic, lowers the glycemic impact of the meal. And so it is a really effective tool that way, but you want to balance it a little bit when it's a sweeter flavored vinegar that's a little higher in calories.
Great, thank you. Abri says, is it okay if I never eat greens and I don't eat any added fat either? Will my fatty acid levels be okay? And she says she doesn't eat seeds either. I told her to get a blood test to check them.
Yeah, so she's not eating grains?
Greens, she's not eating greens because I don't eat the added fats, but I get my blood test every year and I have very high fatty acid levels because of the fact that I eat so many greens. But she's not only not eating nuts and seeds, but she's not eating any greens.
Why?
She says she doesn't like them. Maybe she needs the flavored balsamics.
Oh my goodness. That, for me, it's just a shock, because for me, if I'm traveling and I can't get greens, I feel like I don't have any food. Where's the food? If somebody serves me a meal and there's nothing green on the plate, it's like it's not a meal. And so for me, I have a hard time relating to that. So I would say you need greens. Greens are the most nutrient dense foods on the planet. I don't care if you don't like them. Eat them like medicine, because that's what they are. They are the most important thing you'll put in your body. You have to remember that every single cell of your body is a product of what you put in your mouth. These are our most valuable foods. If you don't like them, learn to like them. So I would say, preparing greens in a way that where you're adding, like I did broccoli last night, where I added fresh ginger, fresh garlic, fresh squeeze of lemon on top. You can do a little bit of tamari, a little bit of balsamic vinegar, and they are absolutely wonderful. You need to flavor them really well. For something like kale or a leafy green, if you're doing, obviously you're not eating salads if you're not eating any greens, but you need to experiment with those and really give yourself a chance to acquire a taste. You might want to start off easily, like adding a few leafy greens to a smoothie. You can't even taste it in that way, or adding a few to a soup where you've got a lot of curry flavor or something where you wouldn't taste it so much. So adding it in those ways and gradually increasing your intake. But getting to your question of essential fatty acids, no seeds and no greens, right?
Right.
No walnuts, obviously. So your intake of your omega-3 fatty acids, there are some in legumes, and the balance in legumes is actually pretty good for most legumes. There are some in fruits, there are some in other vegetables, but the actual amounts, like what you need as a vegetarian or a vegan especially, is about double what the AI is, or the adequate intake set by the Institute of Medicine. So I would say you should be aiming for, if you're a woman, about 2.2 grams a day. And if you're a man, probably about 3.2. So, I mean, aim for 2 to 4. Those are reasonable amounts. it's going to be really difficult to get that amount if you're excluding seeds. So I would really consider adding either some sprinkle flaxseed or sprinkle chia seed on what you are eating. You need probably a heaping tablespoon of flax or chia to get there. But I would really look at adding those things.
Yep.
That's,
So one of the first books I got from you is like a Bible. Really, almost any question a person has can be answered in this book. But then you have this book. So talk a little bit about what the difference is.
Yeah, so the monster book, the 600-page version and the 300-page version, they're two versions of a similar book. But the big version is really meant for nutrition geeks and for colleges or programs where they've got a plant-based nutrition course and they want a textbook. It's fully referenced and it's more detailed than the consumer version, which is the 300-page version. Now, a lot of consumers want the big book. They want the big book because they want those details and they want the references. And so it depends on, your teenager wants a book that they can use to look up, where do I get my iron, for example. The little book will be absolutely adequate. But for someone that really is a little more of a nutrition buff and wants the details, the larger book would be what I would recommend.
Thank you. All you wonderful plant-based dietitians, you don't work in hospitals. And the reason I'm saying that is because when somebody gets sick and they have to be in the hospital and you see a dietitian, it's not you, and so they don't seem to know the same information as you, even though your writing partner and friend Santos said there's this wonderful position paper that you guys wrote, how safe vegetarian and pure, vegetarian diets are. My biggest fear, I thank God I've not been in the hospital for many years, is that if I ever am in one, there's not gonna be anything to eat.
Yeah, and two things there. One is I've been doing this for a long, long time. So I've been, and Vasanto even longer, but I've been basically plant-based for over 30 years. And I've been a dietitian for over 35. And I can tell you in those years, boy, we have come a long, long way. So back in the early days, when I decided to switch over to a completely plant-based diet, I was scared I would be ousted from the profession because I didn't know if there was another vegetarian dietitian on the planet or vegan dietitian on the planet. And I was really nervous about that. But I decided to stay within the profession because I felt like if I left, who would change it? Who would help to effect some change? And so, it was within the first few years of making that shift that I met Vasanto and other like-minded dietitians. And what I want to tell you is to me, which is really encouraging, is I have spoken at dietetic conferences in many countries around the world, including the United States several times, in Canada. And I can tell you, I remember the last time, no, it was the time before that I spoke at the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. I had a room that fit 900 people. There were probably 1,300 people there. There were probably 200 standing outside the door and 300 on the floor. And it was the second biggest selling tape of the entire conference, from what I was told by the people, selling and giving the tapes at the end of the conference. And it was absolutely astonishing, the number of dietitians who wanted this information. And for me, that's so encouraging. Vasanto, my writing partner, was just awarded the highest honor offered by Dietitians of Canada. Our fellow dietitians respect what we've done. They recommend our books. They often have one in the in their nutrition offices at hospitals, and they really are trying. One of the problems is a lot of hospitals have outsourced their food services, and so they get sent these pre-made meals, and it makes it really challenging. But what I would recommend is really trying to connect with the dietitian at the hospital and letting her know that, or her or him, we have male dietitians as well, that you're plant-based and you're wondering what they might be able to do for you. And then supplement with food from friends or relatives that, you know, they can bring you in some fresh food. But often, you know, Vasanta was so concerned. I don't know if you talked to her about this, but she had to go in the hospital for a hip replacement. She was so concerned about the food that she would be served. And she said she was shocked at how wonderful the food was. She said they had amazing vegan food. So, you know, just go in with a really positive attitude. Let them know how much you appreciate what they're doing and how much you would appreciate any little extra they could do for you to supply your food. And I think that's the, you know, and definitely bring in a few little extras.
Yeah, absolutely. Elma wanted me to show the books again. The title, it's basically the same title, but one is the Express edition and one is the Comprehensive edition. Janet wants to know, are your books for type 2 diabetics or for all types of diabetes, including type 1 and type 1.5?
Yes, so the books were really written for people with type 2 diabetes. However, that having been said, I think they could be very valuable to reduce complications in people with type 1 or type 1.5. So because it's the same, you know, it's the same dietary principles that will help you to reduce your A1C, that will help you to optimize your antioxidant status, that will help you to improve your gut flora, which has a huge impact on your overall health, that will help you to reduce, you know, inflammation. It's the same principles. And so while these books weren't written specifically for people with type 1 or type 1.5, I think the dietary principles offered would be very, very helpful.
Terrific. Could you talk a little bit about the new book you're writing and when might we be able to read it?
Yeah, for sure. So the book is called Nourish, and it's already up on Amazon. So if you look up Nourish, Reshma Shah and Brenda Davis, you'll see what the cover looks like. It's absolutely gorgeous, and the book is due by the end of June, and it will be out in November. And so what we're covering in this book is we're covering all the possible reasons people would want to switch to a more we're looking at two things: plant exclusive diets and plant predominant diets. So because we're wanting to direct it towards everyone who's on a spectrum of plant-based eating, trying to move towards a more completely plant-based diet. And so we're covering, you know, these reasons. Then we cover macronutrients and micronutrients and all this we call ages and stages, which is the chapter I'm working on right now that takes you through the life cycle for, you know, pregnancy and lactation, infancy, childhood, adolescence, all of that. And then we go through all of the issues parents might have, lots of questions and answers, and all of the feeding issues and how to deal with all of that. And then we have quite a substantial recipe section as well. So I think it's going to be an absolutely wonderful, comprehensive book for families that are wanting to go plant-based.
Well, I hope you tell your story about the spinach and your kids in it. And speaking of stories, and this might be a nice place to end, because I want to respect your time. Dan says you have a nice story about your son when he found out where hamburgers came from.
Oh, thanks for mentioning that, Dan. You know, my son is, of course, really precious to me. But he was always an interesting kid. I can remember when he was 2 years old, his friend stepped on a spider on purpose. And he came into the house screaming. I thought he had broken his arm or something. He probably cried for 2 hours. He was absolutely devastated that somebody would on purpose kill a living creature. And it was really surprising to me. I can remember once throwing a spider out the window and him crying for an hour because he thought I could have broken his legs or something. But he was just a very sensitive kid. And one day we were driving in the car, and he was in the front passenger seat, and I was, driving, and we were driving by a McDonald's. And my son saw the McDonald's. He said, "Mommy, there's a McDonald's. Could we have a McDonald's hamburger?" And so I thought, you know what? I've never explained to him about the fact that we're basically vegan or vegetarian. At least he would have the odd thing when he was out. But I decided the time was right to explain to him why we didn't eat McDonald's hamburgers. And so I said to him, I said, "Honey," I said, the hamburgers at McDonald's are not the same as the hamburgers that we have at home. The hamburgers at McDonald's are made of cows, and the hamburgers we have at home are made of lentils and things like that, of plants." And he looked at me and he said, "Mommy, people do not eat cows." And then he looked at me with these big eyes, because I didn't respond right away. And he said, "Do they, Mommy? Do they?" And so I had to say, I'm sorry, honey, but they actually do. And he looked at me and he said, "But Mommy," he said, "them have eyes." He said, "Mommy, them have ears, them have noses, them have mouths." He said, "Don't they know? Cows are people too." Aww. And I mean, he said this with tears coming down. He just couldn't believe it. He was in shock. And then it wasn't 2 weeks later that we got invited to a birthday party at McDonald's, his best buddy. And I thought, what are we gonna do? So I checked out the menu, and they had a vegetarian pizza and salad combo for kids, believe it or not, at that time. And I thought, well, maybe he could have that. So anyway, he's in the lineup. It was his turn, and he says to the lady at the counter, he said, "I would like a hamburger, please, but no cows inside." The lady just looked at him. Hamburgers with no cows inside.
Just give him a bun. That is a beautiful story. God, I wish I could maybe I can interview him. He sounds amazing.
He's such a great kid. Right now, I shouldn't even call him a kid. He's 32 now. Is he 31? 31. 31 years old now. And my daughter's 35. I'm getting mixed up here. He was born in 1987. So he is 32.
Wow.
Anyway, or is he? Yeah. Okay. Anyway, he worked in the government for a while, and he's just gone back to school. So he's doing a double master's. He's in the middle of that right now. So wow. He's busy, but he is a really special person.
That is just, I just love that, because I think if people were honest with kids, very few kids would intentionally eat animal products.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Kids get it. They get it right away. They don't want to hurt animals. And we just get disconnected from that as we grow up. And we get desensitized somehow. And I think we need to keep our kids sensitized, because what's happening in this world is really scary. And our children have the potential to make a difference as they get older, and we need them to do that. Yeah. More now than ever before.
Absolutely. Do you have any pets that share your home?
No, because we used to have a dog, but after she died, we didn't get any more pets because of my travel schedule. I just didn't feel it was fair. Yeah. But I love animals, of course.
I know you do. That's what I love about you, is you're not just about the science, you're about the compassion, and it makes for a beautiful human being. And thank you so, you just really, I always say this, but it was so fun that time that we were on the same team doing the Iron Chef. I think we got screwed because our food was really, really good. We were up against a chef that is like a chef that chefs every single day and owns restaurants.
Yeah.
I think we held our own. I think our food was delicious. We didn't lose by very much.
We need to fine tune our skills at making it look beautiful, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was just so great working with you. And so it's so great to be on your team. And thanks for taking the time to talk to us. I wish you great luck with your new book. But in the meantime, I think you have like 10 books, right? Something like that?
11 now. Yeah.
Wow, 11. So soon you'll have a clean dozen. So
clean dozen.
That'll be terrific. Wow. It's taken me like 60 years to write 2, and here you are with 12. And I've got a couple more coming out. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please come back tomorrow at the same time, 2 p.m., when I'll be talking to Dr. Matt Letterman and Dr. Alona Polde from the movie and the book Forks Over Knives. And thank you to the First Lady of Plant-Based Dietetics, Brenda Davis. It's just been such a pleasure chatting with you today.
Oh, you too, AJ. Thanks so much. And thanks for all you're doing.
My pleasure. Bye, everybody.